Good morning, Mr. Johns. John, sorry, I could never see with the light shining on there. And Fran, we're almost on first name terms. It was Mr. Select Committee, the permanent member of the committee. Thank you for coming along, and I am actually going to kick off the question session if I can get this thing to work. Just can I ask you a minute, Mr. Johns? Slightly off topic, but Oxfam are now working to relieve poverty in Wales. Is that so?
Yes, we've been working in the UK since 1996, in Wales since 2000.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not being facetious, but I always thought that you were sort of concentrating your efforts in Africa and places where there were famine, but obviously I'm wrong.
We've been working to relieve different aspects of poverty across the world for 40 years, UK last 15 or 16. We obviously don't work purely on famine relief, work on longer term development as well, and that's where the work in the UK comes in.
So in your estimation, there are levels of poverty in Wales and the UK that are so great that they need the help of an NGO like Oxfam?
We wouldn't classify poverty in the UK at the same level as poverty in some of the least developed countries in the world, like say the Congo, for example, and we never state that's our work. But there is undoubtedly real levels of poverty and disadvantage in the UK, right, which is why we work here, as do several other organisations who work globally, such as Save the Children. So
do you think the government ought to be diverting some of the money they currently use for poverty relief in the third world back towards Wales, perhaps?
I think, given the UK's relative level of wealth compared to most other countries, it has the resources to do both.
Right, okay. And can I ask you, Ms. Target, you've said that or rather the DWP data shows that the work programme is performing less well in Wales than the British average. Have you any thoughts as to why that is the case?
I think it's quite hard to know, certainly from the perspective of our clients. We haven't got any evidence that shows anything specifically different, but I guess if I was pushed, I would have to look at the sort of economic position that people in particular parts of Wales are facing, and the dearth of available full-time, well-paid jobs, reasonably paid jobs in parts of those areas. So I wonder whether there is a link between those things.
And Mr. Johns, you said in your evidence that the people are being encouraged to take jobs that don't match their skill. Would you not think, though, that it's better for people to take the job that's available rather than to wait potentially indefinitely for the dream job that they would really like to have?
What was concerning us was the examples that we came across where people, particularly young people, were actually undertaking very relevant specific work-based volunteering and work experience, which was putting them clearly on the path towards good sustainable jobs and being pushed into, in one particular case we've highlighted Poundland jobs, which takes you out of a certain level of the labour market. So there's a question about whether you're going to get the best long-term result for the person and their family versus the short-term result. And frankly, it's a short-term result. Is it a good short-term result for the person, or is it a good short-term result for the work programme provider who can tick a box and say they've hit a target?
Jonathan Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. You both suggest that payments by results model does not incentivise prime providers to invest in people who are difficult to assist, for instance, if you've got literacy problems or drugs and alcohol problems. How much of a problem is this in Wales, do you think?
I mean, from our client base, we actually don't have a huge amount of evidence about that. And so it's very difficult for me to actually give you anything definitive on that. Most of our inquiries are actually around the link between the work programme and the benefit system rather than other parts of problems. But we certainly, in those terms, are seeing the majority of our clients being the sort of client who is described as the furthest from the labour market, and so those are the people we are seeing who are having the most problem.
On our part, we do a lot of work with people who are quite a long way from the labour market, and the vast majority of our work is in one way or another helping people to get closer to the labour market. So a significant proportion of the people we work with are in a position where they at some point are likely to find themselves on the work programme. and it's not an area where the majority are finding much in the way of clear support. We've given some obvious examples in our evidence about where particular individuals have clearly been deprioritised for support, even when they were keen themselves to actually take further steps to develop their skills towards seeking work.
Do you think there's any other changes the government could introduce to help people who are furthest away from the labour market? Because the DWP will tell us in their evidence that the pricing structure is structured in a way to help those people furthest away from the labour market.
Well, the evidence that we've come across at local level with the projects we work with has clearly been, and some of the evidence that we provided was remarkably frank on behalf of one of the work programme providers in terms of what they described to our project partner, has been it's clearly not happening, because what we saw was an evidence of people being put into a traffic light system where people who were seen as furthest away from the labour market were clearly deprioritised and only got any support at all after having very strong local advocacy. And that clearly implies that the system of incentives to help people furthest from the labour market is not seen as strong enough. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the details of the pricing mechanism, but if you're getting a system where somebody who is clearly seen as going to require lots of support being deprioritised, then the system is not working. What we're not in a position to directly compare with is the impact of not being able to access, on the part of the work programme provider, other support such as that funded by ESF, which might be available in areas with comparable difficulties in, say, England.
And last month, the Court of Appeal found that the regulations used by the UK government for their back-to-work schemes were unlawful. So how disappointed are you today that today's business in the House of Commons, the government are introducing legislation to sort of second-guess that Court of Appeal judgment?
Is that one more for you, given it's mostly about sanctions?
I think the question is more about sanctions, and given what we have found in our evidence from our clients about the sanctions regime and the way it is being implemented, I think to strengthen that potentially makes it even more difficult for those people. And much of what we gave in evidence and are still seeing coming through bureau doors across Wales is where actually good cause or good reason, whichever it is we are in the future going to call it, is not taken seriously. And so whatever the legislative base, actually it's going to be very important not only that the base is fair, but also that it's administered in a fair way.
Thank you very much. I think one or two people want to do just
a bit of context. The claim that the hardest or the furthest away from the workplace are the ones who are not getting supported. In other words, you're advocating the line that these people are being packed. I think in terms of context, then, do you believe that situation is worse under the work programme than under the previous programmes of support that existed before the work programme was launched?
Our evidence would suggest it is, because I think what we've seen under the work programme is partly a consequence of funding and may partly be a consequence of reduced political cooperation in Wales between different levels of government. Has been a reduction in integration between support services. That's certainly how we experience it in the projects we're working in, which means that the join-up between what we might call informal early stage support, basic confidence building, in the worst cases supporting people to kick habits, and the more formalised work training is not as clear as it used to be.
But in terms of the fact that the Genesis programme has at least recently been closed down because it was such a massive failure, is that necessarily a problem of the work programme, or does it say that there are too many people involved in this area in a Welsh context?
I'm not sure the Genesis programme was regarded as a complete failure in all.
Well, the Welsh Assembly have pulled the funding and the outcome figures are pretty disgraceful. Work programme providers in my constituency make the point time and time again that there's confusion out there because there are so many projects funded by European money which are actually targeting the same client base and confusing the offer.
That's the case, and that's one of the justifications the Welsh Government uses for not allowing what they would call duplicated funding. But the reality is that on the ground, you've got lots of people who are benefiting from one level of support, often funded through Welsh Government or ESF sources, which allows them to develop informal skills. When they move on to the work programme, they can't access that support, and work programme providers, in their evidence, have made it clear that they find that undermines their work.
Just a very final point then. You made the point that the Welsh Government didn't want duplicated funding of clients. Then is the issue therefore a problem with the work programme, or is it a problem with the Welsh Government not allowing that duplication to happen? Because it did happen under the previous programmes.
It did, and that was my point, and I'm not quite sure how that fits with work programme providers saying there's duplication of support, because actually the reality...
They're not being allowed to refer their clients onto those programmes.
I think we'll probably have to move on, because there are quite a few people wanting supplementaries.
I don't mean to jump about, Chair, but Mr. Johns mentioned this example of a highly skilled person going to Poundland, and I was just wondering to what extent you think there is a mismatch. I'm particularly concerned because obviously the government says there's 1 million more people in jobs, yet we know there's no more overall output, growth is flat. And there's a concern about highly skilled people going into low-skilled jobs with low productivity, then being out the workstream. And do you think this is a big problem, and how do you think it should be confronted? Should it be a more sophisticated filter and allocation, or is the incentive system wrong?
In the particular case we've seen, and others have given evidence on similar cases, it would suggest to me that the incentive system is problematic. Because if the incentive is purely about securing a job regardless of people's skill levels, this kind of misallocation is likely to happen, because that's the way the incentives are driving both the work programme provider and to a certain extent the individual in terms of what the jobs they can see. On a wider level, I think we would see from our programme work people going into very low paid part-time work almost as a necessity, because there are in many parts of South Wales, and I'm sure you're aware, there are not too many alternatives.
Would you accept though, Mr. Johns, that it's better to be in a low paid part-time job than no job at all?
I would, overall, but the point in the cases we're finding is people who were clearly on the path to developing themselves higher level skills where they could have gone into a more productive job, being pushed into the very, very bottom of the labour market, when actually they might have got a better outcome for themselves with being given a little bit more time to go into higher level jobs, and frankly a better outcome for the economy as well, because better use of their skills.
And may I ask, are they displacing, as insofar as there's a hierarchy of skills and jobs, there's a danger that the high skilled people are displacing low skilled people in low skilled jobs? So not only do the high skilled people not get high skilled jobs down the stream, but low people straight displaced by the high ability people. You see what I mean?
Almost certainly, and one of the areas that some of this evidence is gained from saw a big recruitment from a supermarket in the region. 2,000 people applied for 600 jobs in one day. They all went. A whole lot of people from the projects we work with who would have been able to take on those low-skilled jobs were just displaced by people who are in a much better position to compete for jobs. Right. So we are seeing that quite clearly.
Order. Neil Griffith.
If Chair, I may come in with two questions. I might save a question later on. The first question I'd like to ask, is there such a thing as a payment by results scheme which is actually rewarding people being sent to interview? And I ask this because I've had a number of cases of people being sent for interview for things that they're clearly not suited to, and then obviously, being turned away, or actually being sent, being told that there is a job on offer, turning up something like a building site, only to have, spent the time and effort getting there, spent several hours there waiting around to find that actually there's no job at the end of the day. And I wonder if you can tell us if this is a common occurrence and why it might be happening.
I think probably the work programme providers might clarify the exact payment by results systems. I would, but two observations, I guess. One is we have heard plenty of anecdotal evidence of that kind ourselves. And the second is on these kind of schemes, it is fairly common to have incentives which would reward things which are seen as staging points to finding work, and therefore going to an interview or securing a qualification might count as those. And obviously, there is a risk once you have very strong financial incentives to hit those kind of targets that, in a sense, it corrupts the target.
Go just go on my second point. It's the catch-22 situation, which you were referring to a little bit in response to GitHub. I have a constituent who was forced to go on the work programme in November because he'd been unemployed for a year. He then had a fantastic opportunity to take up a Jobs Growth Wales place with a company that was expanding, where that could genuinely have become a real job after 6 months. But he was told he could not leave the work programme, but the work programme was all about trying to find a job. And it seemed that he'd been successful. He'd done what he was supposed to do in 3 months on that programme. He was told he couldn't leave for 2 years. So he's seeing a really nice job installing windows, or a practical thing that he'd be really suited to, passing him by because he's told he can't leave this work programme. Is there no escape? Is there no way that someone, having been successful on the work programme because they've actually done what they've been told, they've actually got themselves something, they've looked around local employment opportunities, they've found something, the employer's eligible for the funding from the Welsh Government, and yet this person cannot actually take that opportunity?
I mean, to be honest, from the evidence in front of you, from all the witnesses, you'll see other examples which are very similar to that. So that would suggest this is not an isolated problem. And the difficulty here appears to be the join-up between Welsh Government-funded programmes and Westminster-funded programmes, and that is emerging as a significant problem, and one where we need to move towards the greater levels of flexibility we've previously had, because whatever the political arguments for it, where we're most concerned is what happens to people on the ground, and actually what happens to individuals trying to find jobs and provide for their families.
I mean, we can all understand you mustn't double fund things, but would there not be a way where he could escape from the work programme because he'd found something else and therefore leave another place for somebody else on that work programme?
I think that the technicalities of that will have to be answered by somebody who's better informed on the details of the work programme than I am.
Do you know, Ms. Target, about that?
I don't know the technicalities of that. I just thought it was important that I just almost declare an interest. I sit also on the committee for the Big Lottery for Wales, and some of the funding from the Big Lottery is allocated through our life skills to getting people back into work. And precisely this issue about people, who are funded through that funding, not being allowed to be people who are mandatorily eligible for the work programme. And it's the mandatory part of it that the Welsh European Funding Office have made clear to the Big Lottery puts those people out of scope, which of course means that sometimes when they've started on a programme and then they move into mandatory position for work programme, there is that mismatch in the middle, which is a problem for the people who work to that Big Lottery funding and obviously for the Big Lottery as a funder.
Right, Jessica wanted to come in on...
Yeah. It's a supplementary to two questions earlier,
okay,
so
well,
but we talked earlier on about the work programme performing less well in Wales than in the rest of the UK, and it's performing particularly badly for women, so Welsh women are it's not working particularly well for them. And do you recognise the picture painted by Gingerbread, who did some research recently that said that single parents who were promised personalised support felt that they were offered very generic support, and there was a failure to recognise, for instance, their need for affordable childcare and flexible working, and that was one of the problems within the work.
Absolutely, and we've seen evidence of that in England as well with the programme work we do there. I think that there is also, running through some of this evidence, an absence of personalised support for many people, and what we've seen, unfortunately, is a consistent failure on the part of both providers and the job centre from time to time to recognise the care responsibilities that single parents have, sometimes to the point of actually urging them to undertake activities that would have been illegal in terms of leaving their children without support. And this has been quite a serious failure of understanding of needs of lone parents, who are nearly all women, obviously.
And I think we also see that in some of our evidence around the sanctions and how they are undertaken. We certainly have, there is evidence from bureaus of women being sanctioned when actually their reason for not being able to be at a particular interview has been because of lack of childcare. And so those things do sort of follow through from the sorts of things that Chris is talking about.
One of the other most common complaints, I suppose, I get as an MP is that one constituent, for instance, last week said to me he felt that he'd been parked in front of a computer and made to log on to a job centre website and left, which he was perfectly capable of doing in a library or at home. I mean, is that something that's come through in some of the evidence?
It's not come through quite so clearly, because most of the specific things we get are from people who are either at the very back of the queue and who are furthest from the labour market, or people who are, as I described earlier, who are becoming very close and being pushed into inappropriate jobs. I suspect this is happening to people who are seen as somehow slightly more capable of undertaking learning for themselves and are somehow caught in that middle group.
So in the hub group? Or
What might be the traffic light amber group rather than the green or red group.
Turn back to where we started with Jonathan Edwards' questions on the furthest from the labour market groups, those with poor literacy, numeracy, drug, alcohol problems. And in some of the evidence, one of the evidence papers we read, it talked of a downward spiral in the livelihoods of the individuals involved, leading to serious consequences in physical and mental health. So far from having a scheme that's actually helping those groups, we're actually escalating difficult situations and making it more difficult for them to return to the labour market. You talked about evidence, you have evidence. I know a lot of it's going to be anecdotal, but can you elaborate a bit more on some of the difficulties and problems those hard-to-reach groups are experiencing and your experiences of them?
I mean, from our perspective, a large amount of the evidence we gave was around the way the sanctions regime is implemented. And we have a large number of examples, particularly with people with health problems and in particular mental health problems, where, you know, perhaps they are not good at keeping appointments for all sorts of reasons. It doesn't appear to be the sort of support that they have been used to in other schemes, where somebody actually is a sort of support worker and reminds them that they have an appointment and goes along.
Can you just put that just in the context of representing a rural constituency, some of the practical difficulties people have, and the great inflexibility of a system means that sometimes constituencies can't get to the appointments. They haven't got their own transport. They've relied on a non-existent public transport system. I don't want to open the whole debate about that, but it's a problem that some of my constituents have experiencing, which again compounds their situation of helplessness.
Absolutely, and we certainly have an example where in a rural area where somebody was subject to sanctions following non-attendance at an interview linked to a health problem. And then obviously their sanction is that their funding, you know, their income from benefits is reduced. And when interviewed to say, you know, will you be continuing to seek work during the period, he very honestly said, I will find that very difficult because I don't have access to broadband. I have to go to the town to actually, you know, get onto a computer to do these things, and I haven't got any money for the fare. So there is something in the sanctions regime which is sort of compounding the difficulty of somebody who, when they came to us, was genuinely wanting to seek work, but actually finding it very, very difficult. So I think that's the sort of example that we are seeing when the sanctions flow in, that actually it makes it almost impossible then for some of these people, particularly people with health problems, to then actually seek work, which is what they want to do and what we presumably all want them to do.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think the first point to say is that for people who've been long-term unemployed, that many of the problems that they're facing in terms of their personal well-being and personal health are actually not new. The work programme doesn't create those problems. They've been there for a long time. There are elements of things that are happening around the work programme which exacerbate it. But the key issue, complete lack of self-esteem. I mean, we do spend a lot of time in our society valuing people by what they do in their job. And if you are completely outside that, you are outside the mainstream of society. And if you're out there for a long time, you do get cut off. What you then get the situation where people feel that they increasingly lose control of their lives. And the description given in one of the case studies about people turning to drink as a result of that, I think is very is not untypical. It's very, very sad. But it's also interesting in terms of rhetoric used by other parts of government to think that that is a consequence of being long-term unemployed, not the cause, which people might want to reflect on. The other issue is obviously we've got very, very clear evidence it leads to deeper mental health problems. And mental health issues are one of the most common problems on what you might call deprived estates, be they in city centres or in valleys or small town peripheries. And we see that getting worse. And one of the reasons we see it getting worse is that people's level of hope with the current levels of economic difficulty are declining as they see competition grow for jobs. The other thing which is making things worse at the moment is obviously the reduction in available levels of benefits from different sources, which is just squeezing people more and more. And the final issue, which is probably more exaggerated because of different types of political dialogue in Wales, in England it is in Wales, is this kind of levels of labelling and stigma directed at people who don't have work. And that has become, I would argue, markedly worse over the last few years. And it does mean that people who are out of the labour market feel even more embarrassed and more ashamed than they would have done before. But that's not a new phenomenon, it's a worsened one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Sean Jones.
A bit more about the sanctions situation, really. And my first question is to the CAC. In your evidence, which you've already alluded to, you talk about sanctions being applied inappropriately. And how widespread do you think this problem is? And why do you think it's happening?
It's hard to know how widespread it is. It has been a consistent inquiry across Wales. It sometimes rises and sometimes goes down a little by quarter, but it appears to be still continuing in our figures. It isn't in our figures it isn't the biggest area of our inquiries. But of course, for the individuals that it impacts, it is the biggest thing in their lives. So it isn't vast numbers of people that this affects in our experience, because obviously we only know about the ones who make it to our doors. Yeah. But for those people, it is a very serious situation and is facing a substantial number of people.
I mean, the DWP guidance to providers sets out a number of steps that they should take before a participant is sanctioned. Do you think that the guidance is being followed properly? And how much, it appears to be a lack of communication between the various tiers of the system?
I think some of it is down to probably two things. There's probably poor communication and, in some cases, in our experience, poor administration. So a client is told something, but it isn't recorded and therefore isn't actually passed on, for instance, to Job Centre Plus. Or Job Centre Plus are told and it appears that they lose track of the information. So some of it is certainly, in our view, administrative. And I guess both at DWP level and at the providers level, that is something we would want to see improved. Better communication between them to make sure that those people don't fall through the net. There are some issues that we think need to be clarified in the guidance, and while we absolutely accept that it would be inappropriate for Job Centre Plus, for instance, to advise a client who is about to be sanctioned on how they appeal or what they appeal about, we do think that a person should be told, given that the appeals has to be made within 5 working days. Actually, people should be told that when they are about to be sanctioned. Whoever it is gives that information to them first, because then they have the opportunity to consider whether actually this sanction is fairly applied, and they are able to appeal and can seek help. So those are two sort of slightly different things, both of which we think should happen.
You seem to have sparked off a lot of interest with this comment. So, Sian, can I go back to you, and then I'll go to Gito, and then to Nia, if that's right. But for you, please carry on.
I just wanted to finish this section off, really, and give you both an opportunity to respond to this one. You know, you're working on the cutting phase, so to speak. You're dealing with people who have gone through these sanctions. What effects do you think these inappropriately applied sanctions are having on the claimants that you've come across, and how adequate do you think the government's hardship payments for people in these sorts of circumstances are?
The experience we are facing with the clients who are coming to this is that people are, first of all, are already finding it difficult to manage. And once the sanctions are applied, they are, for instance, concerned about, and we are concerned about, you know, how they pay for their housing, their fuel, and their food. And don't forget, some of these are people with families, and so actually, this is a really, really difficult set of decisions during this time that people have to make about what they can afford to pay, and potentially getting them into debt from having been just about managing their lives. We also, I think, are seeing people whose health is impacted because they feel a sort of real loss of hope once, you know, that they've been trying to get a job, something happens, they're sanctioned, they then haven't got any money to do, you know, to pay for their normal living, and actually they feel that nobody cares, and any of them who have mental health problems certainly go downhill, is our experience.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Target. I'm sorry about this. I know somebody wanted to come in.
Just generally then, do you think that sanctioning has a role in encouraging participation in the work programme?
I find it very hard to understand actually sanctioning somebody who is already at the safety net. And I think that maybe we need to think more carefully about incentives rather than sanctions as a way forward. I'm not sure that sanctions are actually an appropriate way. Well, I think that it is more important that we encourage people to want to work. And some of the sorts of things that I know that, for instance, some of the programmes at Oxfam, as an example, but there are many others, about increasing people's self-esteem, actually putting them on the sorts of courses which are not necessarily directly related to a job, but actually are moving them into being more confident, are the sorts of things that will actually incentivise people to take the next steps.
Right, okay. A lot of people wanted to come in.
Fine.
So, if you finish, then get in.
Just on a specific point, you mentioned the lack of coordination, a lack of consultation between work programme providers and the job centre in terms of sanctions. I'm quite surprised by that because the work programme providers cannot sanction without getting the decision maker in the job centre to agree. So obviously there would have to be some degree of consultation because obviously the work programme can't actually do the sanction independently.
No, I understand that. However, we've certainly come across cases where a client has been told one thing by their work programme provider only to find that that is not what is the outcome in terms of what Job Centre Plus say.
But that's consultation.
And then when challenged about that, there is a lack of communication between the two organisations to help that client to overcome the situation. So I think, you know, that's where, from our perspective, the lack of communication is applying. And I think we also would say that there are places where it appears that there isn't clarity about whether a particular decision to go to, you know, we've got several examples, for instance, where somebody is expected to be both at a work programme interview and at something that Job Centre Plus have asked them to go to, and clarity between the two organisations about which of those takes precedent in terms of a sanction or not appears to be a bit of a mismatch. So clients are told, well, if you come here, you'll be fine, whereas actually that's not the case. So those things need to be cleared up.
And just a final question, just in terms of the point, how many then, because you've said there's a lot of people coming through, but I'm sure you have the figures, because if we're talking about this being a big issue, surely you would have some figures for us.
I refer back to our evidence, which gave you the picture of the sorts of numbers of clients we're dealing with who are around benefits and tax credits.
Specifically on the sanctions.
Yeah, if you've got those figures...
I haven't got those figures here today, but we can give them to you.
That would be very helpful. Did I see you wanted to come in very briefly, and then I'm going to...
In extension of what Gita said, I was having a quick glance at your written evidence just to make sure that I hadn't missed something, and in both cases. And I just want to sort of do a role reversal here for two reasons. First of all, because I'm not clear yet what your solutions are and how they would be paid for to the numerous examples of the failures in this system that you've both given. So, one para, put yourself in the minister's shoes for a minute and tell us how we should be doing. I think that would be important. But I think also on the actual examples that you're given, I do think it's really important that we know whether these are the exception or the rule, because if your workload is anything like our workload, the time people end up in front of us is tend to be they've exhausted all other possible avenues. And I think some statistical context to this is absolutely crucial, because we can all pluck examples from the sky which give the impression that a scheme is either brilliant or useless. Right. And I don't think it takes us further forward at all.
Okay. A couple of sentences then as to what you do if you're a minister.
Far be it from me. I think one of the things I would want to come back to is the discussion we had earlier about making sure that all of the opportunities to help those people are brought together and actually help the individual rather than have barriers between them. That's probably the first thing. And in terms of whether this is endemic or just a few examples, as I said earlier, I will get you those figures. I don't know how large they are, but you are right. We see the people at the hardest end, and actually, I don't think it matters that it is few people. If anyone is actually suffering because of these issues, then we should be concerned about it, because these are very vulnerable people that we are talking about.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I was hoping Oxfam might have given us a...
Sorry, I didn't see you there. Sorry, John. Wait a minute. Although, sorry, Gary.
Can I just make two points quickly in relation to your question? First of all, I think the incentive system in the work programme needs to be right to make sure that people who are furthest away from the labour market get the right kind of support. Whatever the balance of incentives at the moment, it's not working. I think that's fairly clear. And the other is we need to have greater access. But I'm not so fussed about the providers. That's not what I'm worried about. People, greater access for people in need of the full range of training support to get it, which clearly happens in some places and not in others. What I would flag up, though, and this may be a controversial point given the way the public services have gone in the UK over the last few years, is that you've got a kind of mixed market here between some people who are providing the services for a commercial gain, the work programme providers, and indeed some of their voluntary sector partners, and other people who are being funded in this context by the Welsh Government with a non-commercial gain involved. And that creates some very unusual dynamics at the interface between the service providers. And that's, I think, is one of the tensions that has probably not been explored, and one that we've certainly encountered.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Garen Davis.
Yeah, on sanctions, do you think the sanctions in place will be more effective after the introduction of, for instance, the empty bedroom tax, the withdrawal of council tax relief, the freezing of benefits? In other words, the people at the very bottom are being squeezed more, and and obviously these sanctions are squeezing them again. I mean, what will be the impact of this sort of double squeeze? Will it be helpful, or will it drive people into despair or crime, or what do you think?
I can't see how it will be helpful. I mean, the examples of the sanctions given in the evidence from CAB have clearly been people in one way or another who were trying to comply. They may not have been able to comply properly because they didn't have the proper information. I mean, we work with people who don't even understand they've been put onto the work programme, mainly because of language problems in our case, but sometimes it happens because of mental health problems as well. I'm not at all clear how increasing the financial squeeze on them is going to make them look harder for work, because most of them are looking to the best of their ability already. It's just going to put them in a more and more dire financial situation. In many cases, it will frankly mean that social housing providers will take up the slack and make bigger losses, because they will use eviction as a very, very last resort. But it assumes that there are people who are not trying at the moment because of the generosity of the benefit system. And I just don't, those people may exist, but I don't see any evidence of them, and we work with a lot of very poor communities.
I mean, I would agree with what you're saying, and we are certainly seeing people who are already, with the sanctions imposed on them, having to make choices about, for instance, paying their rent, and so it cannot be a good thing. And we also have examples of people in shared accommodation where, for instance, their letter's gone astray because they're in shared accommodation, and that meant they have been sanctioned. Now, we're moving shared accommodation up to 35, so there will be a wider group of people who will be impacted by that. I don't see any of this getting better.
Last question.
Two very short questions. Firstly, 35 years ago, some of the people you're seeing now would have been in institutions. Do you think that they're getting adequate support in order to, say, respond to a sanction? And secondly, given the terrible rate of success, 3% for this work programme, would it be better just to give the money to employers to create more jobs and scrap the whole thing?
I mean, from the point of view of individuals, certainly our evidence showed a largish number of people who were facing the sanctions regime who had mental health problems. Not all of them diagnosed. Some of them, yes, self-diagnosed. Some of them, there is stigma still around mental health, and people are unwilling to actually even go to their GP sometimes to talk about it. And whether they are given, I mean, some of them had support workers, some of them didn't. It did vary, but clearly there are people who need support workers who haven't got them. I mean, whether putting this money into creating jobs is a better way, I think, is beyond our evidence.
Any last point, Mr. Johns?
I think, in relation to that, I'm very loath to support institutionalisation unless it's absolutely necessary.
I'm not advocating. I'm just saying some of the people we're dealing with, the type of problems they have.
Yes, the levels of support are limited and probably going to get worse as local authority funding is restricted. Like Fran, to a large extent, the issue of the private sector involvement is outside our remit, although we do have some examples of projects where we work directly with employers, often with people who start off a long way from the labour market. And I'd have to say that our outcomes on those are at least as good as a work programme, although we are working with employers who are willing to engage with people with quite low skills initially.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed for coming along and giving evidence today. And I don't think we've got time now, unfortunately. That's right.
Very, very quickly on
I think it'll have to be within seconds.
Yeah, but I mean, I just want to ask about the providers, whether they're providing enough, coaching, self-esteem, focus, habit, and all this sort of thing. Is there appropriate training provided by?
A quick yes or no.
You haven't finished the question yet. By appropriate training provided by
the work programme providers training.
From what we've seen, the people we work with, no.
Okay, thank you both very much. Okay. Well, order. Thank you, Ms. Maxwell, Mr. Peel. I understand you've come in very much at the last minute.
Yes, yeah. Last minute replacement due to norovirus to my colleague, unfortunately.
That's all right. We're a friendly bunch on the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, so don't worry about that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, perhaps as we're running, we're just about on time, but perhaps I could start off by calling Simon Hart.
Thank you. Morning. The DWP said that the work programme in Wales is performing worse than the overall UK average, and yet, if we read your evidence correctly, your own interpretation of events is slightly different. I think that it would be helpful to get some clarity on the numbers. And secondly, there's a theory, at any rate, backed up by numbers it would seem, that the numbers are worse for women than they are for men, and I don't know whether you've got some light you can shed on that.
Yes, certainly. I think firstly from our perspective, I represent Rehab JobFit, so we're a new provider to work programme. We're a joint venture, third sector-led partnership between the Rehab Group and Interserve. So I think from our perspective as a new entrant, new to Wales as well, the first year is certainly a steep learning curve. We're implementing a new model. We deliver through a managing agent model, so we don't directly deliver services ourselves. So we deliver through 12 end-to-end subcontractors, most of which are from the third sector or public sector. So it's definitely taken us some time to embed our model, really get it working to how we want it to work, and there's no doubt about it, that first year was a challenge. Referral numbers in the early months were extremely high, which impacted our original assumptions around our caseloads. When you look at the overall job outcome targets that we were set, in effect, to move somebody into sustainable long-term employment, for us to achieve our targets, we need to sustain people into work for more than 6 months. So that first year only represented 9 months of operation. We had a very short time to implement a brand new model, building those strong local links and local employment links have taken some time. However, since the national statistics were released, which date up to July 2012, we're seeing month-on-month improvements in our delivery, and we remain confident over the duration of this contract in our ability to perform to our targets.
Forgive me for not knowing the answer, but what actually were your targets? Or what are your targets?
Well, nationally, the overall targets for that first year were set at a job outcome rate of 5.5%.
I think it was 5.5%, and we were just below the average. We came in at 3.39%, and the average I think was 3.5%. So I think it's fair to say that we were just below that. But I think there's a couple of things that I'd like to add to that. First of all, as Chris said, it was that first year, that very sort of start-up phase. And so it's very much a snapshot in time of what is a long-term programme, because people are with us for 2 years, and we don't expect to get a job outcome for 6 months. That's when it gets recognised as a performance measure by DWP. Now, if you look at, it's more helpful to look at performance in terms of what we would call cohort. That means people who joined the programme when it first kicked off in June 11. So people who started the programme then, where are they now? And we can give you some figures. And our job entry rate, that's not the job outcome. So that's a sustainable performance. But in terms of people getting into work, that's standing now at 29%. So hopefully that will give you a sense of the trajectory.
That's good. You're both giving very full answers, but the only thing that worries me slightly is the time. So I hope that...
just a quick follow-up question. That is, I think you've described in your written evidence about the particular challenges that Wales presents, and I was just wondering, is there a regional element or a county-based element to that? And if there is, how are you adjusting the model to account for sort of one or two perhaps unique features of the country?
I think structurally in Wales, one of the biggest constraints we face is the not being able to, for our customers, not being able to access ESF funded programmes within Wales. That differs to our experience in England. So we also deliver in England, and if I compare the two areas, that is a big constraint on us. And it's a lot of ESF funded programmes complement what we do on work programmes. It's not about duplication of funding, it's about complementary support. So mental health awareness, drug and alcohol support, good basic skills training. There's a number of funding streams through ESF that are really complementary to what we do. And I think the example that was referenced earlier about the customer with the jobs growth Wales fund again is a good example of where that restriction has a major impact on us in Wales.
Right, it's an interesting issue, this. Now, Mark, did you want to come specifically
No,
on
it's
this?
the next question. It relates to an answer.
Let me. I know two others who do. I think you'd ask first, Giddo, and then Jessica.
The question I had... Was I going first?
You first.
No, the specific question I had was to what extent do you believe that the unwillingness of the Welsh Government to allow clients from the work programme to access ESF programmes, to what extent is that actually responsible for the underperformance so far? Possibly that's no longer the case, and I hope it is no longer the case. But do you think that has had an impact? Because certainly work programme providers in my constituency have argued that that is a huge restriction on their ability to deliver the programme. And is that a political decision by the Welsh Government?
And perhaps we could have an overview from Ms McHugh on that as well.
Indeed, and apologies for slight lateness. I had to sort of force my way into the building. I run the trade association for the welfare to work industry across the UK. So obviously Wales is just part of the remit. And it's interesting, the question about really, is there a regional or sort of national picture in terms of performance across the piece, and whether ESF has actually sort of got a role to play in relation to that. I think, as has been said, the figures that the government put into the public arena were very old, in effect, only really tell you about performance up till January of 2012, people who'd started a job. And we found that 207,000 people, 100,000 people had got into work by the end of September. We're going to release new data in the next few weeks, and I'm pretty certain that's going to say about 300,000 people will have got into work across the whole of the UK. In terms of that job start figure for Wales, it was actually running at the end of September, 10,000 people had entered work out of 50,000 people who'd been referred. So you had about 20% at that point getting into a job. That's pretty much actually in line with the rest of the country, which is, so I don't think from that point you could really sort of draw strong conclusions about whether there's a Welsh element coming through. That said, you look at the geographies around the UK, and the old industrial areas are generally doing a little bit worse than the south of England, surprise, surprise. So the Department for Work and Pensions is currently saying they don't think that the local economy has an impact on the ability of the work programme to perform, but we just don't think that's the case. ESF is definitely an issue in terms of Wales, though.
Thanks, Ms Maxwell.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Work programmes really designed to be integrated to other funding streams, to other programmes. So there's no doubt that if it isn't, there could be an issue. And as the two prime providers of work programme in Wales, we work very closely with the Welsh Government and with the Welsh European Funding Office through the Joint Employment Delivery Board, which we both sit on, to try and shape some of that. Certainly for the future round of programmes, there's a new round of ESF funding in 2015, which we would hope then that the work programme could be seen as the core sort of employment programme, of which other employment programmes can be aligned and funded through European monies, and that would add huge value, not just in terms of the programmes themselves, but in terms of what it does in able to support people on the ground, people who are all trying to help, because they are the same people.
Right. Thank you very much. Jessica Morgan.
So on that point about European Social Fund and other publicly funded courses, if people, work programme participants were allowed to access these other publicly funded courses, does that mean then you forego your payment for them?
Can I just also say, the work programme was designed around combining funding streams around the individual. The stuff which local authority funds, the rest of the UK, it's ESF funding. It was always supposed to be about combining funding streams around the individual. And the fact that public sector retrenchment, particularly local government cuts, has had an impact across the piece, is then affecting the ability of the work programme to perform. And specifically in Wales, the fact that the Welsh Government did take, I think, a political decision not to allow ESF funding to be used, does bring away some of those building blocks.
But all I'm asking, if someone goes on a European Social Fund course, then does that mean then and then they're successful in getting work, that you still get paid the same money?
They will be on that course because they will have been, once they're eligible for work programme, they are no longer eligible to access ESF funded programmes.
But if you're arguing that they should be, what happens to that person then?
Oh, in terms of
their
designing it, well,
relationship
I
with you
think
and your payments for.
I think that's where it's very, very important to get where the additionality would be. So what is the funding paying for that's adding value to the work programme? So, for instance, a good example could be, say, childcare. So that programme would be designed around childcare outcomes. In terms of the European funding, the employment outcomes would be down to the work programme.
I think if I could just add to this as well, we have a core customer journey that we deliver through our 12 end-to-end providers that set very clear standards about what must be provided and the types of services that must be provided to tackle holistic problems. So it's certainly not about us sort of abdicating from our core responsibilities of delivering a holistic, personalised service, but it is about that join-up and getting value add with other public funding streams. We're more than happy to show the committee our standards that clearly define that customer journey.
Thank you. Nia Griffith. I'd better bring Nia Griffith in, I think that's right.
Can I go back to a case I brought up with the other witnesses earlier, and that is of Ashley Jones, who we all know the Grobstroth Wales Fund is only open to young people who've been out of work for some time. He was out of work for some time, so he was made to go on the work programme last November. Then this opportunity came up. He'd sought it because he was looking for work as he'd been told to do on the work programme. This was an ideal opportunity, a company that was expanding an opportunity for 6 months under the Jobs Growth Wales programme with a very real prospect of a real job at the end. But he's told he can't leave the jobs growth, he can't leave the work programme, and he's obviously got the best part of 2 years left, where he doesn't feel that he's learning anything new when there was this other exciting opportunity. Now, what can we do about this, and why can't he be released from the work programme and transfer? We don't want double funding, we just want him to be released. Now, why can't that happen?
So released from. So what does he want to go to?
He wants to start on the jobs growth
Which is
Wales.
Yes.
A real opportunity, a real chance in a skill where he's quite competent, and he would like to be allowed to leave the work programme, which he had to sign up into in November. He was forced to. Now, why can't he leave instead of staying there for another 18 months?
Well, we can't comment on that particular, an individual issue, but we have had numerous examples of similar, not so much people wanting to leave work programme, but saying there was a Jobs Growth Wales opportunity and there is a dilemma there, and we have made representation through the Joint Employment Delivery Board through to WEFO to give examples. We were asked for any examples and case studies, not just Job Growth Wales, but other ESF funding examples where people have fallen between the two.
Cymru a placement, or is it a job?
It's a job for 6 months, so it's a subsidised job which Welsh Government pay for through an employer.
And the problem we have, being a provider of work programme, I think this is a good example of where it would certainly benefit us if there's greater collaboration between different arms of government, really. So we have a contract where we have a number of our customers who are mandated to us for 2 years, and we have to provide services against our contract based on that mandation. So again, I think that's a particular example which actually needs to be escalated beyond us as work programme providers, because it's a policy decision.
Thank you for that. Can I just say, we're not getting through this.
What's being said is people are, by its very nature, being locked into these things for 2 years when there could be proper jobs. So it seems to be completely counterproductive. That's what's just been said.
Well, look, our focus is on moving people into work and trying to support them into sustainable employment as quickly as we can.
Order. Okay, Mark Williams.
I was going to ask you how you would rate your performance to date. I think you answered that early on, and we look forward to these renewed figures in the next few weeks to make our judgment on that. The chairman in the previous session invited the witnesses to sit in the ministerial chair and paint a picture from there. I'm going to give you the proverbial bit of blank paper now and say, if you were starting again, what would you do differently, if anything?
Shall I take that first? Okay. I think there are real lessons to be learned from the commissioning of the work programme, which I think have to be learned for future programmes, including the Ministry of Justice, outsourcing of probation. And I think there's lessons from the live running of the work programme as well. And the commissioning and the setup of the work programme was extremely rapid. And from there's been a range of repercussions, and particularly, I think, around supply chains. So government gets into power, they scrap all the existing welfare to work schemes, they set up the work programme, which actually essentially is a pretty well-designed scheme. However, the commissioning for that was very, very quick. The invitation to tender went out just before Christmas, and the bids had to be in by February the 14th. That did not allow enough time for proper conversations with subcontractors, potential subcontractors, to sort of solidify supply chains, which then led a lot of organisations, small charities, to feel, oh, well, I had these indicative conversations, they didn't turn into contracts, and I was used as bid candy. So I think a lot of the bid candy concerns are around that rapid procurement, which was just too fast to allow those proper conversations. The programme then went live in June of 2011, big launch, but actually it wasn't really up and running fully until the beginning of the following year. There were 6 months of the most awful cheapy flows, about 10,000 staff moving between providers, contracts being signed, offices being let, but the performance expectations were at 100% go from day one, but actually there was a 6-month startup as well, and that wasn't built into that. The third thing I would just flag is payment by results. We're very much in favour, but the economic backdrop has been very different to that which was expected. The OBR was predicting 2.6% growth at the time the work programme was let, and in 2012 there was only 0.2% growth. And that had a big impact on providers of all levels. And there is no ability to adjust for that in any shape or form, and there is far less money in the work programme overall than was predicted, which, going back to your question about, do you pay your outcome, there isn't enough money in the work programme to pay for everything. There just isn't. So you have to combine the work streams around it. So there would be the 3 things I'd flag.
Okay. Ms Maxwell, I'm going to see the others if I may. Ms Maxwell?
I think, from my point of view, I'd agree with all that, but I'd say in designing work programme, particularly in Wales, I would say sitting down and designing that around where funding streams can be aligned is absolutely critical. Also recognising that in Wales there are economic challenges. We've still got unemployment sits at 8.6 in Wales compared to 7.8 in the UK. And the last set of figures that's seen, Wales unemployment increased by 6,000 at a time when in the rest of the UK it was improving. So there are some real economic challenges, and that's another factor that I think that we need to, if we're designing it again, we need to look at the local areas as well. It's not just a one-size-fits-all.
Thank you.
I think the only point I would add is I think for those customers that are furthest away from the labour market, they have multiple barriers to employment, such as chronic health conditions, people that have 12-month work capability assessment prognosis, for example. I personally would like longer to deal with them beyond the 104 weeks. So I think for those hardest to help customers, a slightly longer time frame would be beneficial to us.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you said that, because that was, I think, one of the concerns of many of us, what I alluded to in my questioning before, this sort of spiral of decline that people get into, which does necessitate more time. The next question, quickly, Mr. Chairman, is a practical one. How often does DWP actually inspect your services and ensure that minimum standards are being delivered? What does that actually involve?
Well, as I say, we have defined our minimum service standards. We have a set of 15 minimum service standards, which we think are pretty prescriptive. So part of those standards are about preventing things like creaming and parking. So on our programmes, our subcontractors must see every customer on a one-to-one basis every 2 weeks, for example. And we are then held to account against those minimum service standards. So we have regular compliance audits conducted by DWP into our ability to deliver to those standards. So we have monthly compliance monitoring audits that are conducted by DWP.
They talk to clients?
There are those audits are based around the evidence that we collate within our audits. We talk to our customers.
But DWP don't?
Not through sort of formal procedures as such.
Okay. Jessica Morden.
You mentioned the work capability, people who fail work capability assessments. How easy is it for them to go out and find work in your experience? And given that 40% of people who are deemed fit for work win on appeal, are you seeing people you clearly think aren't fit for work?
Kirsty, is that?
Yeah, yes.
Absolutely. There are some people who are being found fit for work through the work capability assessment who should never be found fit for work. So that is a real problem. And while they're appealing, inevitably they don't engage with the programme. And actually, I've got quite a lot of providers out there who will, particularly the sort of subcontractors and the charities, they will provide support for that individual to appeal the WCA because that is right for them. Now, it's a bit of a subtle, bit of a sensitive area though, because what you don't want as an industry is being accused of parking those customers. But the WCA in its current form is not good enough.
And can I ask the same question to working in some rehab jobs?
Yeah, I mean, we get instances, some, but we do get a lot of people who have been, assessed as fit for work, or their prognosis is that they will be fit for work in, say, 12 to 18 months' time. But clearly they have a number of barriers when they come to see us. So part of our role is we treat everybody as an individual. So they come through the door, we don't look at their benefit type, we just assess them based on what needs we think they have. And based on that, we then design a plan around what support they might need. Now, for some people with very, very severe issues, that support can start off with looking at things like confidence building and just some sort of volunteering, just getting people used to engaging, because quite a lot of people haven't been on active benefits before. They've been on inactive benefits and they're moving into a transition. So we recognise that, and so part of what we do in our delivery model is trying to address those issues.
Can I ask you something? How personally are you willing to be? Because I've had people in this situation where I just know within seconds that they're not going to find a job or be offered one, but theoretically, they're probably physically capable and even mentally capable of it, but for reasons that I'm not going to spell out here, you just know that no employer would ever give them a job. I mean, what do you do when you get people like that? Are you willing to talk to them about dress, about the way they react to people?
Yeah, we deal with, like I said, we deal with everybody as an individual, and that is not uncommon. So that will be people who come through our door where we'll have some very basic things that we're going to address with them. They'll be very nervous. They might not have been used to even engaging. So part of our skill set and part of that of our supply chain skill set is in talking to people who have those sort of needs and issues and trying to address them. We would never say we cannot do anything to help you. We think we can.
And I think a point I'd like to add there as well is one of the things that we're sort of being far more proactive on with our Job Centre Plus colleagues is actually warm handovers. So actually, our knowledge of the customer does not begin once we've attached them. It actually begins while they're still in the Job Centre Plus process. So we can begin to put a package of support around it.
That's a good phrase. Can I bring it over?
Two questions really. Just one, just to clarify on the Jobs Growth Wales issue, just quickly. Can you just clarify the extent of the subsidy available to an employer on the Jobs Growth Wales in comparison with what the work programme can offer? Because of a 6-month period, isn't it?
It's a 6-month period. I don't have the exact figure in my head, but I know that it's more than the equivalent, the youth contract, which is incorporated within the work programme.
More than the work programme?
Yeah, it's about double.
And that does create a degree of competition, perhaps?
Potentially, yes. And also, for us, it can cause confusion with employers because they don't really care whether it's Welsh government funded or UK government funded. They just see it as, we want somebody who's ready for work. So part of our sell and our offer to employers is trying to explain and unravel some of that. So I think that's another reason why we need more clarity, because it's very helpful to employers as well.
That's fine. And then on the point of the work capability assessments, I'd refer the committee to the PAC report on ASOS Healthcare, because I do agree entirely with Jessica Morden on that point. But I just want to ask the question, in terms of those hardest to reach clients then, the accusation is being made that they're not getting the support that they need. As providers in Wales, then, how would you respond to that accusation?
Well, I would disagree with that. I think part of our model, again as a new market entrant, particularly given the heritage of one of my shareholders, the Rehab Group, which their heritage is all about working with people with disabilities, we deliberately chose a supply chain with strong third sector representations and providers that have a good track record of delivering a range of holistic services to customers. And that's what we're very focused on providing. Our model is based on really getting to understand the customer as quickly as we can on the programme, understand the multiple barriers that they face, and put in a long-term package of support to overcome those barriers. That means actually, putting, sometimes you put job opportunities to one side to tackle other issues first, because it's about sustainable employment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Just on that, but in terms of the financial incentives, could you give the committee an idea as to the differential between hardest to reach and I don't think there's any easy client in terms of the work programme, because they've all been at least 9 months unemployed. But differentials would be important.
Well, the differential in payments, I mean, it does get a bit technical and complicated, and I've
submitted evidence.
I've got the exact figures, but there is a differential of payments attached to the different payment groups. There's actually 8 payment groups in Wales, and each one has a slightly different payment attached to it. So those deemed most hard to help, for instance, would have ultimately the biggest payment attached, which so it recognises that there is more work to do with people who will need more support, and it builds in that incentive. So actually, it doesn't then, in my view anyway, it doesn't encourage people to park or to put people aside. It encourages, because it's in all our interests to do that.
Yeah, if I could just add to that point, if I may, the payment differentials themselves don't cause us an issue. The amount we get paid is not an issue. For me, it's about making sure that people are being appropriately assessed. Their needs are being appropriately assessed before they get referred to us. We have stronger processes in place for warm handovers, and actually, sometimes just referring people by benefit classification type doesn't necessarily reflect the challenges that those particular individuals' customers may face.
Just to give you a national figure of people coming through on job seekers allowance, so that the lowest payment, generally about 40% are coming through with self-declared health conditions. There's a higher number actually who have got sort of low-level depression, etc., who are not self-declaring. But and that's on JSA. That's not even the employment and support allowance. So we are looking at substantial needs. And just one other thing to throw into the pot, Chair, is for those people who do have a lot of needs, it is going to take the full 2 years to get them back into work. There's no point pretending it. And so it's going to take a while for those figures to grow in terms of job outcome. We have got a real issue now in terms of, the first job seekers on the work programme started in June 2011. They'll be coming to the end of their 2 years of support at June 2013. And at the moment, there's nothing in place for after that. And so at the moment, they just go back to Job Centre Plus. And you think you've been building and supporting them as an employer, as a provider, and then you'll just dump it again. So that might be something you want to have a look at.
Thank you very much. Sean James.
Mr. Peel,
yes.
You mentioned warm handovers, and the initial DWP evaluation stated that there were too few warm handovers going on. Why do you think that's not happening? And do you think it's a realistic aspiration, given the amount of work and caseloads that you have to deal with?
Well, I wasn't around in JobFit at the start of the programme, so I started JobFit in October, but since the time I've been in the organisation, actually I've been really impressed with the ethos of collaboration between ourselves and Job Centre Plus and Working Links. So, for example, my teams have monthly meetings with Job Centre Plus to actually work through practical ways that we can get better integration between what we do. We also have quarterly forums with the Director for Job Centre Plus in Wales. Ourselves and Working Links attend those. Again, there to discuss common themes of how we get this better practical collaboration in place. The intent is absolutely there. It just sometimes takes time to embed those relationships in getting working effectively. Wales is a very large area covering 3 Job Centre Plus districts. With a very large branch network. We ourselves have got over 50 locations as well, and particularly with a subcontractor model, we're working hard on then getting better links between our subcontractors and the individual branches at the local level. But the intent is there.
Do you think those meetings are enough to ensure things like the quality of the service? Often information can be out of date by the time you meet. Things happen very quickly. Do you have a mechanism that you could consult in between those specific set times?
Yes, I just think the final point I would make on that, there are a number of practical things that we're now doing to address those very issues, such as co-location. You take Neath in Cardiff, for example. Again, we have co-location arrangements where our advisors are going in and spending a day in the job centre to actually get that better on-the-ground intelligence in place.
I would echo that. I think the more information at the point that somebody is transitioning from Job Centre Plus onto work programme, the better the outcome is definitely going to be for the individual as well, because it can be quite frightening If you're going into another programme, you might not understand it. You might have been on other programmes before. So we've worked very hard actually to develop that with Job Centre Plus. And I have to echo that we have a very good relationship with Job Centre Plus in Wales. Now, what we're going to do, for instance, our ESA customers, so the ones with some of the most challenging issues, we are going to trial something in Cardiff, for instance, where Job Centre Plus, we work with Job Centre Plus at the point that somebody is coming over to us, so that we can explain together what it is that they're going to expect on work programme. And it's also good for Job Centre Plus as well, because after all, they don't always know what it is we're delivering. So the more that the more involvement we have with each other, that's got to be a better thing, about a better outcome for the individual, for the people we're all trying to help.
It sounds as if you're confident that you're getting enough information at the point of handover to personalise the service for the individuals or the participants.
Getting better, and I would say that was definitely work in progress, but it's a lot better. And there's certainly the intent to work together.
Yeah. And I think that we've got 50,000 customers
Yeah.
on programme in Wales. It's high volume. It'd be very difficult to have processes in place where you get all the information on every customer at the point of referral. But it's about identifying those customers most in need and making sure that there's appropriate communication at the time of referral.
Could you tell us a little bit more of how you identify? If you're not identifying by benefit type, how do you determine the service that individuals require?
When they come to Working Links, we carry out an assessment process. So from the point that they referred and what we call attached to us, they are allocated a personal advisor who will be with them in most cases throughout the 2 years, so they get to know and build that really, really important relationship. We then undertake an assessment. We've got a tool called My Way Up, which is actually quite a sophisticated tool that we've developed over sort of 10 years of delivering similar programs. And what that assesses is not just somebody's skills needs, that would be one thing, but also their health issues, whether they've got any confidence issues or even motivational issues, drug and alcohol, everything. That will then inform what we call the work plan for somebody, and that will inform the type of interventions, whether that's something that we deliver ourselves because we deliver on the ground ourselves in Working Links, or whether we deliver that through specialist provision. So say somebody's got drug and alcohol issues, for instance, we would refer them, and we've got very good organisations, for instance Salus, who we work with across Wales, and we would refer somebody onto those interventions first, because we know that before people can really think about work in those instances, we need to address those other issues. They might have housing issues, ex-offenders coming out of prison. We really do have a huge number of issues.
And our model is largely similar. It's slightly different as far as we're a managing agent and have 12 end-to-end subcontractors, so there's slightly, we have passed on elements of the black box to our supply chain partners, but how we then manage the quality of what our supply chain partners deliver is through our minimum standards. So all customers must be seen within 2 weeks with a face-to-face welcome interview. That welcome interview has a diagnostic, which is there to diagnostic the holistic needs that they have, and then it's about an appropriate action plan and course of interventions to address those multiple barriers. And beyond our 12 end-to-end subcontractors, that also, like Working Links, includes using a number of voluntary specialist interventions as well. So I think to date, since we started in Wales, we've used 52 different third sector partners beyond our tier 1 suppliers to support those customers, and that would be typically for things like mental health issues, drug and alcohol support. So a very similar approach to Working Links in that regard.
Okay,
Thank you very much indeed. Neil Griffith and then...
We've heard evidence about sanctions being applied inappropriately. I mean, what would your comments be about the way that sanctions operate, and is there a confusion between yourselves and Job Centre Plus? Are there better ways of working the system, and what would you suggest as reforms?
I think my view on this is I think firstly a large proportion of our customers have been mandated onto programme, and we are then responsible for informing back to Job Centre Plus if those customers are not participating against the interventions that have been set out against that mandation. So that could be mandated activity, attending job interviews, being proactive around job search,
Do you think they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing? Are
Well,
you saying that they're sort of landed on you without a chance for you to explain to them exactly what your expectations are?
Look, our approach is through regular one-to-one support and dialogue with the individuals. So we fully take into account mitigating circumstances like sickness, reasons why people can't be attended. We properly explain the sanction process to our customers as well. That's explained properly to them by Job Centre Plus. And I say, we are not making decisions on whether benefits should be sanctioned, but in a mandated programme, we have a responsibility, if appropriate within the guidelines that have been set to us, to refer that on to Job Centre Plus for a decision.
And do you make any allowances for difficulties of access? We have a lot of people living in quite isolated places. It's quite difficult for them to get down, particularly if someone in the family is sick or something like that.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very big consideration in a number of areas and regions within Wales, and that's absolutely taken into account. I think I don't have the specific numbers here, but in terms of volumes, we're talking about a minority of referrals for DMA sanctions. Our approach is to build a strong one-to-one relationship with the customer, which is a two-way process. They're accountable to us, we're accountable to what we provide to them, and we set that out very early on in the programme.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm finding the orders going out of the window a little bit here. Geraint Davis.
I just want to ask a very quick one about people coming off employment support allowance who've got particular needs. Obviously, you're paid to try and get them, up to speed to work. Do you think there's a case to be made for also the employer to be given some sort of subsidy as well? Because at the margin, employers may be facing a choice between people who've come off ESA and they've had a history of disability or whatever, and someone perhaps who isn't. And even with your best efforts, there's still a difference from the employer's point of view. It sort of doesn't really add up. Do you think there's a case for that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What we don't want to do is sort of label people. This is an ESA, job seeker, and therefore they're more difficult to employ. And so, in terms of sort of selling in that individual to an employer, you're also always talking about what they can do, rather than what they can't do. However, the labour market is as it is. So people by and large on employment support allowance are going to have significant barriers to the workplace, and at the moment there isn't anything really in place to help the employer. Though, of course, what the work programme providers do is a significant element of in-work support, and actually the majority of their payments are around sustaining people in employment. That's the way the programme's structured.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, it's about having that relationship with the employer first off. So we've got that relationship, and the employer knows that when we do place someone with them, we're not handing them over and handing them off. That I call it a tripartite relationship between us, the person that we're getting into work, and the employer, and it's very important for us. And actually, a large number of jobs, we talked about earlier about displacement as well, which is quite an important point. There's a large number of entry-level jobs which customers with barriers will be happy to access. And is suitable. So if you get the right job for somebody, actually the employer is very happy with that person. Again, we don't label them. We don't want to label people. But if they've got particular issues, yes, we'll work with the employer to say, okay, they might have some particular health issues. Can we help you to accommodate that? So we work very closely, and it's quite successful. But there's no doubt that in a competitive labour market, which what this is, with people who are recently unemployed competing for sometimes the same jobs, it is a hard environment that we're working in.
How many people have you taken on in working links from your own scheme?
In the past, we've had a number of people, and we have had recently people from work programme, not many, but we have had people where they've been our customers, that we call them customers, people who we've helped into work. And quite a lot of the people who work, well, all the people who work for us in Working Links in Wales are from the communities that our clients work in, and some of them are customers.
Taken on anyone from the work programme?
Yes, we have. We obviously have very thin employment, being a managing agent model. But we have a contact centre in Swansea, which has taken on customers. And actually, a number of our partners, we have 4 local authority supply chain partners. And there have been some really good examples of job creation and back into the local authority, actually.
Excellent. Jonathan Edwards.
One of the criticisms of the work programme and its successor schemes is essentially it undercuts or undermines paid employment. How would you answer those criticisms?
Well, the work programme isn't about job creation as such. So it's not like the Future Jobs Fund, or sort of similar programmes along those lines. So it isn't the case of it undercutting other programmes or other schemes, because of course the providers only get paid if they get people into work. So I don't think there's an element there of conflict at all.
I'm thinking from an employer perspective, because clearly if you take people from the work programme, you don't have to pay wages, do you?
Yes, you do have to pay wages.
To the clients at the same level?
Yeah. There's no subsidy for the employer taking on somebody from the work programme, unless it's somebody under the youth contract. So for 16 to 24, if they take on somebody via the work programme, youth contract subsidy, it's 2,000 and something a year. It's not very much, actually. It sort of offsets the national insurance costs. That was the idea of it. But there's no subsidy for employers for taking on somebody from the work programme otherwise.
There's evidence at a UK level that subcontractors aren't receiving the referrals they were expecting under this scheme. What's the situation in Wales?
Well, as I say, in our model, we have 12 end-to-end subcontractors, and they have received their full allocation of referrals based on the referral volumes that we receive. So we segment our supply chain by geography, and we align providers to job centre pluses, so we don't have competition within our supply chain. So all our partners have received their referrals. On top of that, I said to date we've used 52 additional specialist providers as well in the services that we provide.
Working links?
In Working Links, we have 5 providers where we subcontract entirely the programme out in different geographical parts. So they're delivering our model in different parts of Wales. We have 5, and their referrals would be very much reflecting the referrals that we get. They get exactly what we would get, proportionate to that area. We then have underneath that about 60 other subcontractors who deliver a range of either specialist support, so it could be national across Wales, for instance, Salus Mental Health, or there could be providers who deliver things through what we call spot purchase, where we would buy something very specific to deal with a very specific need. It could be somebody, I don't know, who might have issues with sight or something like that, so we would purchase a very specific service through that. Now, we haven't had anything formally through that people feel that they haven't had enough referrals. It was a slow start in terms of the numbers of people coming through from the ESA client group, so which we would tend to use specialist providers first. So in the sort of first few months of a work programme, there were less people coming through with those sort of needs. So that reflected then because it's a demand-led service that we would apply.
There's two issues. The ESA one has been really sort of very acute. The number of people coming through an employment and support allowance for a long time was only about 6 or 7% of what had been predicted. And it's only in the last few months they've been coming through in any numbers. And they would disproportionately be served by voluntary sector subcontractors, so they have really lost out through that. But the other thing is there has been a bit of an issue in the past around DWP forecasting, particular volumes of job seekers coming through, and then them not coming through. So the prime contractors was told, expect this amount. They then told the subs, and then they haven't appeared. So that's been a concern as well.
Well, the Welsh Affairs Select Committee and the Work and Pensions Select Committee have held reviews into the work programme, and I'm informed by the clerks that the evidence from employers has been very scarce to both inquiries. So do you think that employers out there have sufficient knowledge about the work programme?
It's still an issue, I have to say. We work very closely with the CBI in particular. We produced a joint leaflet between URSA and CBI that went out to all the CBI members, plus the networks of trade associations through the British Chambers of Commerce, etc. However, a CIPD survey a little while ago showed that only 40% of employers even knew about the work programme. And there's real confusion among employers between work programme, apprenticeships, work choice, sort of the Wales-specific, all these different public sector funded schemes, and they do get confused. What's the priority?
Okay, thank you. Geraint Davis.
Are there areas of England which are particularly successful in terms of work programme and the like, where there can be, cross-referencing and sharing best practice and so on into Wales?
Yeah, there's There is good practice out there, and actually the industry is a very collaborative industry, which is interesting for me, given it's supposed to be sort of black box and people are in competition with each other. But I think what you've seen from Rehab and Working Links, there's a lot of collaboration, even though they're competing. So specifically, at the moment, got a working group looking at employment and support allowance customers and what the best practice is around them, because that's an area where the whole industry needs to improve.
Okay, thank you. Mark,
Question on transparency of data, and in the evidence concerns were raised about the restrictions you're under in terms of the release of performance data. I've detected that slight impatience in some of the answers that you've given us. You portrayed a very positive picture. It's not perhaps borne out yet by the figures to date. You explain why the figures that we had earlier on. What is the impact of that lack of transparency, and how should it be addressed? I noticed in the evidence again you talked about the need to have that synergy between local authorities in particular, and that's been lacking to date.
And MPs.
Indeed.
You want to know what's going in your area, quite rightly. And at the moment, the work programme providers can't give you any information. You have to wait until the National Audit Office and DWP publishes the data. And at the moment, it is not frequent enough. And because of the time lag factor, the stuff that the department will put out at the end of May will only tell you about people who've got into work by the end of January of this year. So you're never going to get a live running picture. So I think we need to look at what is reported and how frequently it is reported. And I think that's in the public interests, and providers want that.
Have you made those representations to DWP?
The Minister knows.
What's been the response of the Minister?
I could not possibly tell you what the Minister thinks.
It'd be interesting to have a written answer to that.
Thank you very much.
Just on that point, you obviously share the contract for Wales. You've got different models. Whose model is getting the best results, and what's your forecast for what those results? Will you be doing much better than the 3.1% job outcome that came out when the next set of figures come out in May?
I think I'm not going to say anything about being better than Rehab JobFit, but I think we are very close actually, which I think reflects where we are and the labour market, and in terms of the future, we're very positive that in terms of the performance for the second year, that we will meet some of our performance levels, if you take it sort of overall, but we won't meet all of them. But going into the third year, we are, because of this, I always call it a super tanker of the way things are calculated, and that we're very confident for year three. I can't possibly comment on how Rehab feels, and they can talk for themselves. But yeah, the important thing is that it's working for Wales, and I feel confident that it is working for Wales. It's taken a while. It's taken a little while to get off the ground for the reasons that we've talked about this morning, but it is now really gathering momentum, and our job now is to make sure that really gathers pace and gets real traction.
We're apparently going to have a very, very short.
Can I simply ask, in terms of Remploy factories that close down and people are then required to get other work, what's been the success of people who used to work in Remploy factories getting work through you?
I don't have that specific breakdown, but an anecdotal view is very much based on if people have historical work experience, they are far more employable than people who have never worked. So their previous experience in Remploy factories is beneficial to us then aligning their skill sets to other opportunities that they're sourcing.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed, and thank you to the committee as well, because we're almost on time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.